All right, today we're going to continue our study in the book of James, and we are turning the page into chapter 5 with a new mini-series called Patience. So quick question, how many of you want patience? Raise your hand. All right, how many of you want it now? Raise your hand. You want patience and you want it right now, right? Okay, how about this? How many of you would admit that you struggle in the area of having enough patience? Come on, who's out there? Who are my people? Yeah, there's a lot of us out there that struggle to have enough patience. Listen, the Lord has given me many gifts. Patience is not necessarily one of them. I do not come by patience naturally. By my human nature, I'm a very impatient person. What's funny to me, though, is that in my role as a pastor of this church, I seem to have a great deal more patience than I do in any role outside of that, which I could just give God the glory for. Sometimes it amazes me. I'm like, I don't know why I'm so patient with this, because really I shouldn't be. I should be annoyed, but God has given me patience beyond my own ability. But there's one place where I struggle to have patience more than just about any other area, and that is in the area of travel. How many of you know what it's like to not have patience while traveling? Come on. Because I'm the kind of person, I don't want to travel. I just want to be somewhere else. I just want to get there. I don't want people are like, road trip. I'm like, no trip. I just want to be there. I don't want to be in the car for 20 hours. I can't even stand that. And last thing, what's worse than a road trip? A plane trip. Yeah, it's nice that we can get all the way across the country in a couple hours, but it is the most hurry and wait scenario you ever experienced. I mean, you're like cattle being shoved into these aluminum tubes and hurled through the sky, and all you do, the whole thing, is just a major exercise in patience, right? So just a couple weeks ago, I was coming back from Ohio, and on the last leg of my flight, I came back from Atlanta. So what they did is they scheduled me to go from Ohio to Atlanta to come back to Boise. Now, I guess these people have never seen a map, but Atlanta is the wrong way if you're trying to get to Boise. So after flying for over an hour to get to Atlanta, I had a 4.5-hour flight to get back to Boise. And I was able to go online a few weeks ahead of time. I don't know if you've done this, but I was able to pick my seat. Have you done this? And I chose a window seat. And when you're doing that online, you're just picking squares, and you're trying hey, you have no idea if that's going to be a good seat or not. You're just hoping it's not a horrible seat. And and it seems like no matter how much I pay for my ticket or how early I get checked into the flight, my boarding group is steerage. Does anybody else have this experience? It's like there's group 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 through 20. I'm never in those groups. I don't know what lottery those people won. I'm in the steerage. I'm in the don't call us, we'll call you. Just sit there and wait for the chickens to get on, then we'll let you on the plane. So I'm like one of the last people to get on the plane, and I get back to where my window seat is supposed to be, and there is a young couple sitting in the same row that I'm in, but they have the window seat. So I say, excuse me, I think this is my seat, this is my number and the letter, and they're like, what? No, I don't know, how could this happen? Well, I suspect, I don't know if you're cynical like me, I think they did that on purpose. They were just hoping to get away with sneaking in the window seat even though they didn't reserve it. And honestly, I'm a pretty chill guy, especially flying alone. I would have probably let them. But there was a flight attendant there that was laying down the law. She was right there. And she just started barking orders. She's like, nope, this letter. Trust me, nobody in that plane was going to sit in the wrong seat after that lady was laying down the law. So I get into my window seat, and everything seems okay, although I suspect maybe they're not super happy with me. I wasn't trying to be rude. I was very polite. And I get in my seat, and now the wife of the couple is in the middle seat. And, listen, I'm not judging. I'm not trying to be rude, I promise you. I'm just being objective. There's only so much space between the armrest, and there was a little bit more of her than there was of the space available, leaving a little bit less space available to me. But it was, and that's fine. I was okay with that. I was like, I'm going to be okay. This is going to be fine. It wasn't that big of a deal. So everything was fine, and eventually we get underway, and the plane starts rumbling down the runway, and then this young lady, she reaches into the seat pocket in front of her. And it wasn't like she was looking for a magazine, like, hey, what does this 737 need? What are the exit route? It wasn't one of those. It was an urgent kind of, I need something now. And she pulls out one of those little baggies. She pulls out one of those air sick bags. And I am like, oh no, this is happening right. Listen, I have flown thousands, probably tens of thousands of miles all around the world. I have flown. I have spent so many hours on airplanes you can't even imagine. Most of you can't. I've spent so much time on a plane. This has never, ever happened to me. I think once I was on a plane and like 12 rows back, there was like a rumor that somebody got sick back there, and you're like, oh, wouldn't that be awful? But no, here I am trapped on the window seat of this plane, and it is going down. So she grabs this air sick bag, and she just fills that thing up. I mean, she just fills it up. And I'm like, I'm really scared because I already know I'm a contagious crier. I mean, if you start crying, I'm just going to start crying with you. This is what's going to happen. But I'm like, what if I'm a contagious vomiter? What if this is just going to turn into a barfarama on the plane and everyone's going to be sick? I don't know what's going to happen here. But here we are, the three of us in a space about the size of a phone booth. Do you all know what a phone booth is? Is that a relevant term anymore? Where Superman changes clothes? That's about the space the three of us are in. The husband, the airsick wife, and the little scared pastor cringing in the corner, hoping he doesn't die. And her husband was a rock star. I mean, this dude was like, and I was truly impressed. He was just taking care of his lovely wife. He took that bag like it was no big deal. He never seemed to worry about how I was feeling, but he was taking care of his wife, and he gave her his air sick bag, and she was not done. She just kept going, and she filled out that other bag too. And, and have you ever noticed on the jetway of the planes that they have all these posters, and they're trying to make you feel like you're in store for like a spa day. Like this is the best experience you're going to have. And literally there was one of the posters in the jetway that says, and it shows this person just like totally jamming to some movie or something, and it says, the me time you deserve is just moments away. Well, I remembered that poster while I was sitting. I'm like, this is not the me time I had in mind. This was totally false advertising. So now I'm thinking that I had a decision to make. I had a decision to make because she has filled up 2 air sick bags. There's only one left, and it's mine. And I'm not 100% sure I'm not going to need it at this point. But I'm like, okay, it's decision time. So it was, can you relate? This was an awkward moment, right? So I grabbed the air sick bag out of my pocket, and I'm just like, here you go. And the only word she spoke to me on that entire plane was she said, thank you for that air sick bag. And she needed it, I'm telling you. So, the husband did such a great job. He took those, and apparently those flight attendants, I mean, they've got this. This was not new. This is just a day in the life, right? He takes those things back, and apparently if you use the air sick bags on the plane, they upgrade you to the commercial grade. He came back with an air sick bag the size of a pillowcase. They're like, here, this ought to go handle the rest of the flight. Thank goodness she was not sick anymore. She got whatever was in her system out into those bags. And everything was fine. Well, about 2 hours later into the flight, 4.5-hour flight, about 2 hours later, I hear a call. It's Mother Nature. And she sounds angry. I mean, it was it was time for me to go. But by this point, airsick mama is now sound asleep, laying over on her husband. And I'm like, I'm not going to be that guy, right? I'm not going to be. I've already taken their window seat, didn't mean to really, but I've already been a jerk. I'm not going to make them get up and get out of the way. So for 2 more hours, I sat there, and then the plane landed and taxied, and then you wait for what feels like 1 billion hours for that time between when the door of the plane opens and all the people gather their belongings and get off. That takes about 7,000 hours for that process to take place. That long plane ride was no doubt a test of my patience. And boy, did it test my patience. But I had to simply relax, wait, and trust that eventually I would be off that plane and headed home to my family. How many of you can relate to the reality that there are some things that we cannot control? Right? In fact, if we're honest, there's a great deal of things in our lives that we cannot control. So we can either lose our mind, get all upset, but how many have experienced that not helping in the past? Come on, you've lost your junk, you've lost your mind, you've got all crazy and realized it didn't do any good, did it? You need patience. So James chapter 5 is shifting from how to draw near to God, which we covered in chapter 4, and to a command about being patient. Now this is a good place to point out that the chapter breaks and the verses that we have in our Bible, they were not there originally. When James was writing this letter, he didn't go chapter 5, verse 1. That was added many years later. So let's go down to James chapter 4, verse 17, which is our last verse we used last time, and it says this: "So whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin." Remember that this was not an abstract theology about any type of omission, which is the way a lot of people will use that verse. This was specific to the idea that we should submit our plans to the Lord, that we should say, Lord willing, that whatever God wants to do, that's what we submit our lives to. And if you missed that message, you can catch it at flfc.church. Now, this also applies to the context moving forward, but there is a very interesting rant, at least I think it's a rant, that James kind of rants in this passage right here. And he is warning a particular group of people, and it is probably not the group you think it is when you first read it. Okay, are you ready? Let's read the word together. James chapter 5, verse 1, and it says this: "Come now, you rich, weep and howl for the miseries that are coming upon you. Your riches have rotted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver have corroded, and their corrosion will be evidence against you and will eat your flesh like fire. You have laid up treasure in the last days. Behold, the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud, are crying out against you, and the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. You have lived on the earth in luxury and in self-indulgence. You have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered the righteous person. He does not resist you." And then look at this, almost like he's addressing a different group of people. Look at what he says in verse 7. "Be patient, therefore, brothers. Be patient, therefore, brothers, until the coming of the Lord. See how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, being patient about it until it receives the early and the late rains." It's very interesting in the book of James if you pay attention who he is talking to. Because as I went through the book of James, I counted 11 times that he said brothers or my beloved brothers. He was addressing brothers, which were other believers in the Lord Jesus Christ. He was addressing other Christians, and he addresses them by calling brothers. But he also addresses 3 other types of people throughout the book. Starting in James chapter 4, verse 4, which says this: "You adulterous people, do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God." And he starts a section there, James chapter 4, verse 4 through chapter 5, verse 6, which is essentially an asterisk where he is addressing someone other than his beloved brothers. And within that section, he confronts people who are, first, unfaithful to God. That's the adulterous people. We covered that in a previous message. People who are unfaithful to God. And he says, come now. He says that twice. He says that back in verse 13 of chapter 4 when he said, come now, you who say today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town and spend a year there and trade it and make a profit, which we covered in the last message. And then this today in chapter 5, verse 1, where he says, come now, you rich. So let me ask you a question. In James chapter 5, verse 1, who is James talking to? Who is he talking to? Who is he addressing here? It looks like when we read it that the people, the group of people he's identifying is rich people, right? How many would agree with that? That's what it looks like the text is saying. Don't be afraid. It's okay, because you're like, I know I'm going to raise my hand, then you're going to tell me I'm wrong. Just nobody, you're all like, we've played this game before with you, preacher. We're not doing it. Okay. But it does. It looks like he's saying rich people. But now let me ask you another question. Who is rich? What qualifies as a rich person? Are you rich? Is Donald Trump rich? I mean, where's the line? Because I'm guessing at least most of you in here don't make the same kind of money that Donald Trump might make or that Bill Gates might make or, some, famous wealthy person. Where is the line between a rich person and what we might call a normal person? Let me tell you this. Every person in this room, every single person in this room, every single person watching this live stream, every person within the sound of my voice, every last one of them has far greater comfort. You have greater access to comfort. You have greater access to clean, healthy food. You have greater access to clean, drinkable water, and you have greater access to quality health care than anyone of any wealth bracket that James was writing to. Do you realize that? You may be sitting here saying, I don't know what you're talking about, preacher. I don't got 2 pennies to rub together. I got more bills than I got money. I got financial trouble. I can't do what I want to do. And you're sitting there telling me that I'm rich. Well, that makes me mad. Listen, if we measure based on what you can buy with that money, even the poorest people in our culture today, at least in our country, have greater access to all the things that the wealthiest people would try to attain. You have access to all of that on an exponentially larger. I mean, now we're not talking about a small degree. We're talking you have things that the wealthiest people that James was writing to could ever have even imagined. So if rich isn't clear enough to identify who James is talking to, is there anything else in the text that can identify who James is referring to, who he's warning? There is, absolutely there is. So let's read it carefully. Let's go to James chapter 5, verse 2, and it says this: your riches have rotted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver have corroded, and their corrosion will be evidence against you, and will eat your flesh like fire. You have laid up treasure in the last days. You see, it wasn't just that these were rich people, it's that these riches or these rich people were being consumed by their riches. Do you see that? It wasn't just that they had wealth, it's that wealth had them. They were being consumed by it. See the phrase, eat your flesh like fire? I don't know, have any of you ever had like a lot of money? Like to me, let's say $100 in ones. Surely almost everybody in the room has seen, staggering wealth like that. Have you ever been burned? Did it burn your flesh? No, this is a metaphor. He's not saying that the actual wealth will consume your flesh. It's that the desire for it The love of it is consuming your flesh like fire. Have you ever known someone who was consumed by their wealth? Maybe a low hand. How many of you have ever known somebody that was like that? Sure, I bet most of us have, or we can at least think of somebody. Sometimes people who don't even have that much wealth by our standards, right? Somebody that doesn't qualify as, quote, rich or super wealthy. Sometimes people that just have a normal amount of resources can be consumed by the wealth. In fact, it's possible many of you in here today are unknowingly consumed by the wealth that you have, even if you don't think you have that much. For example, if tithing or giving 10% to God, if you can't acknowledge that God gave you 100% of what you have, and you just can't bring yourself to give him 10%, return 10% to him, it causes anxiety. You go into frustration, you make excuses for why you shouldn't have to, and you just wrestle with this concept, you're probably being consumed by your wealth. And you're like, well, I don't even have that much wealth. Well, whatever you have, it can still consume you. You don't have to have an unspendable amount of money to have it consume your character and your walk with God. If you can't be generous and give to other people, like if you can't, it just never happens. You don't ever buy nice gifts for other people. You don't ever pay for other people's dinner or their coffee. You're just never a generous person that way. Just because there's something in you that's just like, I can't, you may be being consumed by your wealth. Okay, let's keep reading. James chapter 5, verse 4. Behold, the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud. That's very key. Listen to that. Which you kept back by fraud are crying out against you, and the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. So these people that James is addressing, they're not merely rich people. It's not solely the criteria of having a measure of wealth that he's identifying them by. He's identifying them by their fraudulent activity. These are people who cheat and have cheated other people. They've had employees and they've cheated them out of their wages. Do you see that? So it wasn't just that they were wealthy, it's also that they were fraudulent. Look at verse 5. You lived on the earth in luxury and in self-indulgence. Everybody say self-indulgence. Come on, let's all say it out loud. Say self-indulgence. Self-indulgence. You have lived on the earth in luxury and in self-indulgence. Do you know what self-indulgence is? That's where you put yourself first. That everything about your priorities, everything about your comfort, every decision you make about how you spend money is designed around the idea of giving yourself the greatest benefit and the most pleasure. You just want to indulge yourself. So this is who he's identifying. He says, you have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. Now, I know a number of people who would not be considered wealthy by our modern standards, but who spend everything they get, every penny they get, exclusively to indulge themselves. Just to have the latest form of entertainment, the latest gadget, and that's exclusive. There's nothing wrong with having the latest gadget. I've got the latest gadget. My latest gadget is this new iPad up here. It's stupid expensive. There's nothing wrong with having the latest gadget. The problem is when your whole world is about indulging yourself. You hear me? And it gets worse. Look at verse 6. You have condemned and murdered the righteous person. He does not resist you. Listen, these were not just wealthy people. They were fraudulent, selfish, self-indulgent, and they were even murderers. And this is so powerful if you'll see it. I want you to catch this. Look at verse 7. Then he says, be patient, therefore, brothers. Come on, do you see that? The word therefore is there for a reason. This is very important. He says, be patient, therefore, brothers. He said, in spite of everything that I've just said, because we see that this evil exists in the world, that we see there's these adulterous people who are not faithful to God, there's these prideful people, these arrogant people that make their own plans and don't submit them to the Lord. And then there's these wealthy people that they get their wealth by defrauding other people, indulging themselves, even to the point of murdering others. He says, but you, brothers, be patient. Be patient, therefore, brothers. Look at this, until the coming of the Lord. Oh, come on, somebody. This is so good. Look, it says, see how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, being patient about it until it receives the early and the late rains. You see, verses 1 through 6 of chapter 5 were an example of extreme impatience. He's illustrating impatience. These people that say, mine. Come on, has anybody raised children where you had to train them to be selfish? You're like, hey, don't let them walk all over you. You tell them that's your toy. Has anybody ever had to tell a small child, you go tell them that's your toy? You don't have to do that. From the moment we come out of our mother's womb, we are instinctively wired to be selfish and to be motivated by what benefits us. A child that has no understanding of possession can be possessive about whatever is right in front of them. We have to weed that selfishness out of our life. We have to get it out. We have to get it out of our hearts. But these verses were an example of extreme impatience. People who say mine, who say now, who say give me. And then James is saying be patient. Come on, everybody say that word. Say patient. Be patient, therefore, brothers. He changes back to addressing the brothers after several verses of addressing other people. He says, see how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth. Man, you think being stuck in the back of a plane in the window seat with an airsick mama, you think that requires patience? And baby, I'm telling you, it does. It takes a whole nother level of patience for me anyway. But that's nothing compared to what the farmer does. You see, you and I live in a world that these people could never have imagined. You and I can go to the grocery store and get whatever we want, whenever we want it. In fact, when they don't have our favorite flavor of coffee creamer, man, we get indignant. We're like, what is going on around here? Heads are going to roll. But we can go down the produce aisle. We can go to the meat section. We didn't plant a seed. We didn't water a plant. We didn't rake a field. We didn't do any work to achieve it. We can just walk in at any time and eat anything we want. Have you ever noticed the plethora of bananas at your local grocery store? I mean, you could even go to most of the convenience stores. You can get some gas, walk into the convenience store, and they probably have a banana. It may not be the freshest one you've ever seen, but it's there. And did you know this? I don't know if any of you are farmer mentality. I'm not, but I know this. Did you know that bananas don't grow in Idaho? Did you know that? They grow a long way from here, thousands of miles, hundreds of miles, I don't know how far away, but the tropical regions, right? Central America, they grow these bananas there. They have to ship them here. And yet you and I, we can get them, and we can get them at such a cost that even today in the inflation in the market that we live in, we can buy a bunch of bananas, eat 2 of them, throw the other 5 black ones away, and think nothing of it. Come on, who's with me? Who does that? I've made jokes that we should buy them and throw them away at the cashier stand just to save time, because it seems like so many bananas go uneaten. But nobody's worried about it. No one's like, oh man, that's breaking the bank. We are so accustomed to being able to get whatever we want when we want it, at an affordable price, even in this economy, that we don't even think about it. But imagine for a moment that the harvest was what defined your quality of life, what made it whether or not you were going to have enough food to eat to survive the season. That's the people that James was talking to. And he said, you need to be patient. We think patience is not losing our junk when we have to wait in line for a couple minutes. These were people waiting for what would either give them life or they would starve to death. See how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, being patient about it until it receives the early and the late rains. Now let me ask you a question. Is he talking about farming really? Is that really what he's talking about? Is that what James, he's like, here, listen, I want you guys to really think about agriculture. It's not talking about farming. He's talking about Jesus. Be patient, therefore, brothers. Till what? Until the coming of the Lord. Listen, friends, I've got news for you today. Jesus is coming back again. Come on, somebody. Jesus is coming back again, and that ought to get each and every one of us excited. Now look at how James stresses this in verse 8. He says, you also, referring back to the farmers, you also be patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. He's saying, be patient. You need to get your heart ready because the return of the Lord is at hand. It is as close as your hand. He says, establish your hearts. That means you and I have a responsibility to prepare our hearts for Jesus and not be distracted by the wealth of this world, by the things that it can buy, the indulgence it can provide us. We need to establish our hearts in spite of those things. Now is the time to get that self-centered, self-focused, materialistic nature out of our lives and bring it into the submission of Almighty God. How many of you would agree that there are many things in our life that we cannot control? And we cannot control when Jesus returns. But we know it will happen, and you and I need to be ready.